Good morning, everyone. So I'm here to talk about our work on modeling cortical oscillations, especially on the human connectome. So I'd like to begin the talk. We've heard from recent talks from the past few days the importance of understanding how actually the structure of the brain shapes neurodynamics. So there are recent works that show that there's actually a correlation between the strength of your connectivity with your functional connectivity. And more recently, in James Roberts' lab, they've shown that the structure shapes the function, and there's the emergence of brain waves, large-scale brain waves in the brain. So if we were able to understand how the structure shapes neurodynamics, we might be able to interpret normal and diseased brain function. So in this talk, we'll focus on neural function in terms of cortical synchronization, wherein it represents the integration of local activity from different brain regions. And recent works, several works have shown that excess or deficit of this cortical synchronization can be associated with certain pathologies like epilepsy or Parkinson's disease. So the main objectives of this talk is to show you a whole brain computational model to generate cortical oscillations on top of the connectome. And we want to investigate how the structure-function coupling leads to patterns of this large-scale synchronization. So we'll use a very simple model. Most of you probably know about this already. A Cura model that represents oscillators, discrete oscillators with certain local phases theta j. It has, in our model, we use two different parameters. One is C, the coupling strength, which measures the strength of connectivity that scales the connectivity strength between brain regions, and sigma, which is the noise strength that represents the strength of certain perturbations, maybe intrinsic neural perturbation or some extrinsic perturbation. We also have two important ingredients. One is the structural connectivity matrix and a natural frequency of oscillation, which I will describe later on. So again, we use the structural connectivity matrix, which is an average connectome from healthy subjects, which has three important properties. One, it's very modular. It has an exponential decay in terms of its log weight versus the length between brain regions. And it has this gradient of connectivity strength from hubs to peripheries. And now, what kind of frequency of oscillation we want to induce? So we use low fMRI frequencies and impose a heterogeneity across the network, where it's inspired by the hierarchy of timescales recently found across the cortex, where the peripheral regions actually have small intrinsic timescales, and hubs have large intrinsic timescales, and we model this in terms of a hierarchical distribution like this. So again, we use the structure and the dynamics and let the system oscillate across time. So what do we find? So by just tweaking that single parameter C, we may be able to find different regimes of synchronization patterns, wherein weak coupling strength will lead you to these very random oscillations wherein you don't see any significant patterns. And if you move to the middle portion, the intermediate region, you see these local patterns of integration, and you see a little bit of those brain waves that I've shown a while ago. And if you move further, you would expect that if brain regions are really strongly connected, eventually it will synchronize through time. Now, the intermediate region is very important because if you match the model to functional connectivity, you actually see that the coupling strength sits in the middle, in that peak region where we measure the variability of synchronization across time. And we see that there's a peak that represents sort of a criticality where the brain sits at. So we use that coupling strength to observe how does perturbation affect the synchronization patterns. So let's begin with that, the normal case. Okay, there's no perturbation at all. We have this level of coherence somewhere in the middle. Now, what happens if we increase the strength of noise? One would expect that, hey, it's going to destroy the coherence pattern, right? But we observe the opposite. The noise, the perturbation actually increases the coherence and induces those local synchronization patterns. And if we increase the noise further, it destroys now the coherence pattern. So if you look at the phase difference across the entire connectome, you see that it has a flat probability distribution function, and it changes to a sort of like a Gaussian-like distribution. Now, we ask, so this is what we call stochastic synchronization, where there's an optimal noise strength that improves the synchronization of the entire network. But we find the same effect if we partition the network across its strength, wherein we observe the same thing for hubs and peripheral regions. So this effect is not new. The physics world already knows about this, and they call this the stochastic resonance effect, wherein you increase a little bit of noise and you improve the performance metric. But the neuroscience world are starting to pick up and show that it actually this mechanism is observed with improved sensory motor performance or perceptual decision making and even magnetic stimulation. So we then ask, okay, what's the mechanism behind this stochastic synchronization? So we first, okay, let's fix the time scales and we fix the frequency distribution. No, the other way, sorry. We fix the connectivity and we change, we ramble the distribution of frequencies. And we observe that the effect disappears if we change the distribution from a homogeneous one where every single oscillator is the same, a uniform distribution where everyone just randomly oscillates across the connectome. But if we change it to a distribution with a certain, a flat tail distribution like a Lorentzian distribution, we see the effect, but not significantly. So this might tell you that, okay, it means that the heterogeneity in the connectivity might actually be the reason why the heterogeneity in the timescales might actually be the reason behind this. We also look at the effect of the global network. Okay, let's destroy the network connectivity. So first, we fix the connectivity to it's not moving. There you go, a fully connected one. And again, the effect disappears if we randomly, if we randomize the network but preserving the weights of each node. Again, it disappears. However, if we maintain the sequence of the strength, wherein we maintain the locations of the hubs and the peripheries, we see the effect, but again, not significantly. So this might tell you that, again, the heterogeneity of the connectome might give you this effect. And then we look at the clustering mechanism, wherein we put each node's face on a unit circle and see if do they stick to each other, or what happens when you increase the amount of noise. And we measure the number of clusters and the size of clusters. So the hypothesis here is maybe that small noise effect will enable the nodes to stick to each other and form these clusters. So again, we start from the beginning without any perturbation, and that's the level of synchronization on the left, the number of clusters on the top right, and the size of the largest cluster at the bottom. If we increase the noise by a little bit, again, we know we've seen this a while ago, there's an increase in synchronization. What happens to the number of clusters? It decreases, but it becomes bigger. So that gives you an idea that, hey, it is right. They stick to each other and allow each other to influence that small cluster. What happens then if we increase the noise further? We know, again, that the synchronization is destroyed. But what happens to the number of clusters? It goes back to its high number of clusters and small sizes. And then we investigate it further. So, okay, if you have a very, very high noise, what does it represent? So we generated different models, and we found that the action of strong perturbation disconnects the network and makes it randomized. So they sort of randomly oscillate across time. So in summary, we've shown here that by using a simple model with just one model parameter, the coupling strength, you can obtain a rich repertoire of large-scale synchronization patterns. We found a very counterintuitive effect called stochastic synchronization, where addition of this order is actually not bad. It leads to a more ordered state, but only for a certain level. And the effect is driven by 3 different mechanisms. One is the hierarchy of activity timescales in the brain, the heterogeneity of the connectivity, and this formation of big clusters if you increase the noise. There you go. I would like to thank Dr. Roberts and Dr. Goyo, who are part of this work. Thank you.